Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It is a joy to be with you here on the Santita Jackson Show. I am on Blue Sky at santitajackson.bsky.social and the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. Come on over, everybody. Come on over. And then the Santita at Santita J on X. Yes, I'm still there. How much of me will get through? Well, we don't know. And then, of course, the Santita Jackson and Friends Facebook page. That's the only place where I can get friends. And so let's talk about migrants and the migrant crisis. It has been writ large. Indeed, I think part of the reason that President Trump decided to focus on Chicago is because our city council meetings, if you will, they're lit. They are very, very charged. But that is Chicago. I mean, we have the Bears, we have the Bulls, we have our soccer teams, we have our basketball, our women's basketball teams, and we've got politics. That is what we do in Chicago. But something has happened with the migrant crisis that has really opened everything up because Mayor Brandon Johnson has also helped us to see the contradiction. Contradiction as we're bringing in many, many Venezuelans and Guatemalans and Haitians and a lot of people. They're the ones that we're making the noise about. But at the beginning of the conflict in Ukraine, 38,000 Ukrainians were brought into Chicago with barely a peep. They were given pathways to citizenship. Number one, they got in the country. They went not just a little Ukraine, they went into Chicago. They were able to get housing, they were able to get jobs and pathways to not just working and staying here, but citizenship. No one has mentioned that at all. No one really talks about that. And we have these desperate people who've been brought here, who've been chased out of their country as our corporations have really tried to take all of their resources. Let's just keep it real. But they've been put in the most under resourced community, one of them in Chicago. Black people never got our 40 acres and a mule. So I hear us, I feel us. But one of the challenges is that we're being cast as the villains, I think, in this story. Black people are beginning to look harsh and mean and like we want to deny people. That is not what Black people do. That is why they were put in the Black community because we knew you could not put them on the North Shore. That was not going to work in the affluent white community because they would not have been accepted. I think everyone knows that. So, here on the Santita Jackson Show, Dr. Adrienne Pine, you've never been here before, but I want you to come back. We really traffic in truth here. And what we're trying to do is find out what's going on. Easy peasy, you said that the Mayor Johnson is really taking a lot of hits. Yeah, he is. He's taking the hits. But I want you to keep this in mind, and I've said this often because I always try to find information for us. We've had this great discussion about the H-1B visas, and they really are treated as indentured servants. And you can get into more of that, Dr. Pine, because you're out there in California, UCal Berkeley, and there's so much work that you're doing. You're an anthropologist, and there's so much that you have done in that space. And I want to hear from you. But we also have something called a lesser known program, really it's an unknown program called the Tent Partnership for Refugees. Secretary of State Blinken and the head of Kobani Yogurt signed a memo of understanding in November of 2022. And at the time, it was a couple hundred companies. Now it's grown to more than 400 companies that are in partnership to bring in refugees from all over the world into the United States. No one talks about that. It's the same, it's the corollary to the H-1B program. We're bringing them here to go to work. If Governor Abbott, who happens to be part of the World Economic Forum, if he were serious about taking people out of the United States, he would have driven them right back across the border, Brian Mullins. He didn't do that. He brought them into the United States and dispersed them all over the country. DeSantis did the same thing. Why? If you don't want them here, then you don't want them here, then you put them out. No, you didn't do that. You brought them here so they could go to work for cheap. Because this is still a country that's built on stolen land and built with unpaid labor. Black people did not work for free. We weren't paid for the work we were done. So let's talk about this in that context, having that backdrop. Dr. Adrienne Pine, I want to thank you for being part of this show today. I'm going to let you frame everything, but as we do, I want to welcome back to the show Curry Peterson Smith from the Institute for Policy Studies. He's one of their Michael Ratner scholars. We are so excited to have him here. Pastor Stephen Thurston, who opened up his church to the migrants here in Chicago. And I want to know why it is that you felt compelled to do that. Want you to talk about that. And of course, you've had interesting, a lot of very interesting experiences overseas too, because you spend a lot of time out of the country. So I want to hear what your thoughts are, because that has helped to shape what you're looking at. Of course, Brian Mullins, director of the Black American Voters Project, you're doing so much work, fine work, with the Black community here in Chicago, and really it's resonating all across the country. And so I want to hear what everybody has to say, because I'm on my way to the DNC leadership election in Washington, D.C. We're trying to get a progressive slate installed there. Hey, we may win, we may not win, but if we don't run, we definitely will lose. So we're going to keep on going. But Dr. Adrienne Pine, I'd like for you to help frame what we're looking at with this migrant crisis, with these ICE raids, 1,000 people a day. Now, by my calculations, 1,000 people a day, if it's 10 to 30 million people, say it's 10 million people on the low end, that's 365,000 people a year, which means it's going to take you about 28 years, rounding up, like 27 and a half years to get them all out of here, if they don't have any children. So a lot of this to me is performative. But correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know. I'd like to know what it is that we are looking at. As I just saw something come across my phone with a young man who was buying a Whopper, and he was physically accosted by the authorities in the Burger King. And even those who said, well, he's an illegal, he should go, but they said, they shouldn't have handled him this way. I mean, come on. What is this? Dr. Adrienne Pine, welcome to the show. Now that you've been welcomed onto the platform, you're part of the family. Help us to understand, what are we looking at here?
Thank you so much for having me, Santita, and what a fantastic introduction to this topic overall. I think, you started out by talking about the contrast between Ukrainians and other migrants. I think that's a very important and obvious contrast. Ukrainians are white, and they fit in well with the Chicago community, and that's the kind of migrants that Donald Trump wants. He spoke very clearly his first term when he talked about why do the migrants always come from asshole communities or nations, and he was referring to nations that are primarily populated by brown and Black peoples. And so the criminalization of migrants is very specifically a criminalization of brown and Black migrants in the United States that's happening. And as you noted, the raids are, more than anything, I think the most important characteristic is the performative characteristic of them right now. They are intentionally being carried out. They are being, televised. You've got embedded journalists. They're being carried out in a way to create terror among migrant communities, to make them feel like they are in far greater danger than they have been, and certainly that's working. I'm in touch with a lot of people. I do a lot of work on Honduran asylum cases specifically, but also am very networked with Latin American and Caribbean migrant communities, and people are terrified right now because of this TV show. But if you look at the statistics on deportation on different kinds of removal, Obama still has the highest number of deportations of any U.S. president, including Trump in his first term. So I think what we're looking at is this attempt to really create terror by criminalizing people, by making non-migrant U.S. populations, or even migrant populations who have passed that sort of legalization boundary,
Mhm.
to feel like migrants are putting them in danger. What the statistics show us is that migrants actually commit fewer violent crimes than U.S. citizens or people born in the United States, but that, the facts have no bearing on what's happening right now. This is intentionally being carried out as part of Donald Trump's explicit white nationalist agenda, but at the same time, it's a continuation of the policies of prior Democratic and Republican administrations alike. So I think that's really important to take into account. In terms of the visas being issued for people, for intellectual laborers in this country that you mentioned, the HB1 visas and et cetera. I mean, the important thing to note there is we as a nation have ceased to fund education, really. I mean,
Here,
we've just let it go down. Yeah, in the United States. And I mean,
I
our
refuse
public
to believe that the only brilliant scientists and engineers are from India.
Oh,
That just
they're
doesn't work.
absolutely not. It's just that we're not paying for people who aren't already wealthy to become educated in science and engineering fields in the United States. So there's an artificially created shortage in this country that, of course, is also a quote unquote shortage because people want to be paid a living wage in this country, and they have the power to demand that to a certain extent. Whereas people who are coming in on these specialized migrant visas don't have that power, as you mentioned. So they do end up being in a sort of class of specialized indentured servants. And that's important to take into account. And I mean, overall, what we're looking at is a picture of capitalism driving, the so-called, or creating this so-called migrant crisis. There, in fact, I mean, when we talk about the migrant crisis, there's sort of an assumption that there is a migrant crisis, right? That we somehow as a country are in crisis because of migrants. But of course, what we also know is that migrants pick all our food. They do a vast amount of the work that people from the United States don't want to do, talking about, the people who are not on the specialized visas, but then the people on the specialized visas are also keeping our tech economy going and all of those other things. Meanwhile, by creating this notion of a migrant crisis, of course, what capitalism is doing is pitting migrants against the communities that are most subjugated historically by U.S. racial capitalism. And so you mentioned earlier this sort of pitting of Black communities in Chicago against recent migrant communities, in particular Black or Brown. And of course, that's strategic. That's what rich people want. They want us to forget that, the 1% has some vast amount. I can't remember what the percentage is right now, but that the wealthiest people in this country have far, far more. And if there were any sort of even remotely equitable distribution in society, then we really would be able to provide for everybody, including housing, education, whether people were born in this country or not. But it's because, there are these billionaires who all at this point now happen to be explicitly in the presidential cabinet, as opposed to, previously when they were always there anyway in different ways. These contradictions are especially evident. And so I think it's really important to continually be thinking about who is profiting from these moves, and why are they happening, and who's being played? I mean, all of us are being played, really, but in particular, the communities that have been historically most subject to the structural violence of U.S. racial capitalism are the ones that are most violated in this context, and the ones that are profiting, of course, you've got this entire industry. You've got this massive, the vast prison industrial complex that is operating at the border. And of course, now, as journalist Todd Miller has shown, and many others, the border extends throughout the United States. There are checkpoints. There can be checkpoints anywhere in the country. There are ICE prisons, which are actually contracted out to Geo Group or many of these other private contractors, for billions and billions of dollars. There are the quote unquote alternatives to detention, where people are shackled. And, to add to the point about the theatrical nature of these raids, there's also a theatricality in the deportations that has caused a stir in Latin America, with prisoners being returned on deportation flights fully shackled in the most humiliating ways. And so this was behind the rift between Gustavo Petro, the president of Colombia, and Donald Trump the other day. I think it's short-sighted, however, for Petro to have, been satisfied with Trump's promising to not shackle these people anymore, because the humiliation that they are enduring and the dehumanization that migrants who are detained and who are threatened within their own communities in the United States are suffering goes way beyond being shackled in a plane, at that ultimate last moment of their deportation. And, it's sort of obvious to say that, standing up for migrant rights is standing up for everybody's rights, whether we were born in this country or not. But it needs to be said. This is the very obvious face of a growing neoliberal fascism that has been in the works for a very long time.
And I think it should not be lost on anyone that Colombia was confronted as Black people in Colombia are taking positions in the government of tremendous power for the first time. They are really asserting themselves on that stage. And so, the consul general here in Chicago, he's an Afro-Colombian. He's the first. The vice president, Afro-Colombian. And so there's all
the foreign minister as well.
Absolutely. When you just keep on going down. So there's a lot that's going on. And then we've got Elon Musk, David Sachs, Peter Thiel, Robert O'Brien, who was the NSC advisor under Trump, who goes to college in South Africa in the 80s. Okay. I don't know. But, it's just me. That's just me. But Pastor Stephen Thurston, New Covenant Missionary Baptist Church, you and your family have helmed that church for a century. You stepped out, though, at a time when, there's a lot of pain in our community, and you're sensitive to it. You're in the heart of it. And yet you made your church a sanctuary for migrants. Why?
Because the Bible talks about the greatest commandment. And Jesus said, love God with all your heart, soul, and mind. But the second commandment is equally as important. Love your neighbor as yourself. And I see and I teach my congregation that everybody is our neighbor. And instead of raising the question as to, is this person my neighbor or not my neighbor, ask yourself and challenge yourself, are you being neighborly? And that should extend to everybody, because they've come for us, just like they're coming for other groups of people now. And it takes all of us to have some cohesion and some solidarity to fight back against this minority of people that are seeking to oppress us and marginalize us, because what's happening to these individuals is morally abhorrent. Splitting up families. We still have children that have not been reconnected to their parents from the last time Trump was in office, and separated people at the border. And so it is the work of the church, especially the Black church, with its prophetic voice, to not develop prophetic laryngitis, but to speak truth to power, to call things what they really are, and then to move from the prophetic message to providing prophetic maps, meaning that we hold people by their hand and we walk them to their destiny, providing them with the resources and the needs. And so since we already feed people throughout the course of the week, about 170 or so families come to our church on a weekly basis to receive the basic necessities. When migrants were placed in our community, were sleeping at police stations and on the streets, I said, bring them here. We've got the space, whatever you need. We want to be the hands and the feet of Jesus, and we want to serve you, and we want to love you and care for you. And as has been said, because I do work in policy space, I recognize that 30,000 migrants had come to Chicago that lacked melanin in their skin, and nobody raised a damn about that. But the minute those with melanin in their skin got here, all of a sudden it's a problem. And you had Black people, some sitting in my congregation, they getting all our stuff. That's not how that works. We're not about to play that game. We're not about to do that. You all are going to be educated. You're going to get rid of the propaganda, and we're going to understand what's happening, where funds are coming from, and how we can support our brothers and our sisters, because everybody's our neighbor.
Well, then, but let me just very quickly ask you before I pivot to you, Brian Mullins. How did you handle that? Because there are many Black Americans who feel cheated. And, and to be fair, our 40 acres and a mule, we never got that. We never got reparations, ever. And so there's a wonderful song. I don't know if you remember it, Brian. I don't know if you're old enough to remember it, Dr. Adrian Pine. But the Staple Singers had a song, When Will We Be Paid for the Work We've Done? First time I heard it, I was at the Soul to Soul Festival. I was 7 years of age in Ghana. And they sang it. And it resonated with me then. Because our parents made sure that we had some clarity and understanding of what was going on around us in the world and where we fit in it. So how do you talk to it's not just the people in your pews. Your church goes beyond the walls.
Sure.
You minister all over the country, and you minister in your neighborhood. What did you say to people when they saw that you were feeding the migrants?
Yeah, I brought them back to the understanding of collective consciousness and how it takes us working together as a collective group of people for all of us to press forward against those that seek to separate us, engage in divide and conquer tactics. And we all have to collectively come together. Black people had, and we were doing well when we collected together, supported one another. And then some of us got high on our horse, thought that we had overcome, and abandoned that collective effort, shifted to this individualistic, westernized perspective, and abandoned our roots. And so some of the gains that we had, we lost because we lost our focus. So I called us to accountability on that, called us to rally together amongst ourselves and with these other brothers and sisters from other places. And I challenge our people to recognize, why is it that they have fled from and ran from where they were? They just weren't taking a leisurely walk. Something's taking place that you need to be aware of and be sensitive to. Because if you weren't under the same duress and same persecution, your behind would get up and try to get out of there too. Here these people are who've come to another country they know nothing about. They've been put on buses, shipped to places in this country they know nothing about, to other places they know nothing about. They're lost. And we have to come together, grab them by the hand, and love on them, just like we would want that done to us. That's how I responded. That's how I pushed back against those who took issue with me doing the work that I felt God was calling me to do.
Brian Mullins, the Black American Voters Project. I mean, what's on your mind? You talk to us.
Well, it's a little bit different than everyone else on the panel. So let me start there, right?
Mm-hmm. Let me say,
yeah,
having understanding that,
yeah,
that's why you're here.
That's fine.
Because because on my panels, I've had everybody here.
Sure.
Because one of the things that we don't do is give voice to all of the voices. You are unvoiced, and I want you to be on a platform where you'll be respected, because I know you're going to be respectful. but I want you to be heard because I think that you speak to a very real train of thought, and we want to hear it,
Yeah.
and we can respond, and we can get into it.
Yeah.
We're gonna hug it out at the end before we get out of here. But so what are your thoughts, Brian Mullins? Because
So,
we love you. That's why you're here.
well, so yeah, so it was a lot said, and I'm a political independent. So the Black American Voter Project, we're for Black Americans, not Black immigrants, but Black Americans. In America, we are 44 million strong. If we were our own tribe, we would be the second largest tribe behind Germans or countries, nations on U.S. soil if we were to self-encapsulate ourselves. So what we've watched from slavery on through, right? We're the bottom caste in the richest country in the world, okay? With that being said, when you turn to the immigration conversation, and this is a long flowing conversation, back in 1880, after we were freed out of slavery in 1870, 1880 was the first major wave of immigrants into America. So this is a 200-year story that's culminating now. And we watch from 1927, 1970, we watch waves of immigrants come into America. And every time that happens, Black Americans are pushed lower in the economic ladder. We never get our chance to be part of American society to go forward. And so we can build a base to go, build a base, our economic base. And so when the migrant, so you all will appreciate this or not appreciate it. So we talk about the migrant.
Oh boy. We are going to get him back. These things happen, everybody. He was not fleshed out. It's just the technical side. But we are going to bring you back, Brian Mullins. Okay, we got you back on the stage.
All right. Okay. So I was saying, so in immigration fight in Chicago, I live in South Shore. So my neighborhood is the number one place where the migrants came. And I remember talking to some aldermen, and the aldermen were saying, gave me a hint, because you guys mentioned Ukrainians. Hey, I'm going to give you a tidbit. Everybody's looking at the buses, but don't forget there are already over 300,000 undocumented immigrants in Chicago already. Ukrainian, Mexican, and Mexican, which is now they were not out in the public. We never talked about them until we start seeing the planes and buses. And we still never talk about that amount. It's over 415,000 undocumented people in Chicago right now. From a Black American standpoint, all of our communities have been gutted by policies, and we live in a Democratic state and city. So there are no Republicans that cause, we've been having education crisis for 40 years where our children can't read. They're right now at Chicago Public Schools, 87% of Black children can't read at grade level. That's Democratic, right? And we know who the mayor is and who's running the teacher side, right? So housing is the same way. We have been under the gun all the way across the board. So our neighbors saw the migrants at South Shore High School. They're about to put them in the South Shore High School building, which is brand new. Part of the organization that I'm affiliated with filed the lawsuit to stop the migrants from moving into the high school. Why did we do that? Because we are inside of a middle-class community, a stable community with houses and homes and children. And we didn't want what we saw happening other places to happen in our own neighborhood, right? And so
they weren't moving, and they were being moved in, right?
Well, they were in Chicago, though. They had just started. The plan for the city. So the plan for the city was.
No, hold on, Brian, because I was just trying to make the point that they don't know Chicago.
Oh, okay,
they don't even know to move there. I'm saying they're being poured in.
Yes, and again, we can always go. They could have been stopped. I mean, if I was the mayor, I would have had a different response than Brandon Johnson had, right? Or Lori Lightfoot. I would have had a different response. But once we got to the point, they were going to use that high school building that we as a community have been asking the city for so we could put our own services and resources in. And they've been shooting us down, for years. All of a sudden, they were going to move the migrants. That was going to be the staging center. So once we filed the lawsuit, that's why you saw everybody sleeping on the floors in the police stations, because their plan was stopped on where they would put them. That's how they ended up sleep, because they had no place. They were expecting 3,000 people to be staged in the middle of a Black community, into this. Now, why that's important, we continue to act like that the problems that have been exacerbated by in Black communities, this is really major cities, every city across the country, is under the reign of Democrats, right? So it's you know, when I hear Trump, I'm thinking, well, for the last 50 years, everything that affected my life has been under Democratic rule. And I don't care if we talk about Mike Madigan, Daley, Loram, all of them, our communities have been ignored. Now, all of a sudden, after asking, begging, marching, pleading, right, here comes some new people from another country coming across the border into our neighborhoods. They get everything. All the elected officials and NGOs are standing up with them, cheering and partying. And we also now know a lot of the NGOs, the same one that get grant funding out of Illinois and Chicago, are the same ones that were in Venezuela and these other countries and at the border, ushering people down the line. And we know that everybody can read. We all know this now. I mean, I can go back to in 2019, Chicago Teachers Union went to Venezuela. Now, is that a coincidence? Maybe. I don't believe in coincidences. I think it's all interconnected. And I think the connection is socialism, communism in America, right? And it's how we viewing all this coming about.
If I could just stop you there, with Venezuela, it's not quite that simple. Only because Chavez was someone who really identified as someone who was Afro-Venezuelan, and he was someone who, remember, he was seeking to give us gas that was almost free, right, in the Black community, and he had such an identification with the Black community and our struggle here. And he had so much respect for us that Reverend Jackson was in Venezuela when Hurricane Katrina hit. And of course, it came from the South. Right. And he said, Reverend, this is going to be really bad. So he pulled several Marine hospitals. And he said, I don't know if Bush is going to take my call. My father called President Bush. President Bush refused to take the Marine hospitals, which would have saved the lives of thousands per hospital. It's just unbelievable.
Right.
And they have had such an affiliation. I don't think that we even understand, Brian Mullins, how much our brothers and sisters from the South want to relate to us. I mean, they even gave Reverend the honor of being the last person to eulogize him before Maduro did, when Chavez died.
Sure.
I'm not talking about.
No, yeah.
I'm talking about how much they revere,
right,
our struggle.
What?
So I just felt that.
That's fine. Yeah, and I'm passionate about this too. That's why I interrupt.
Oh no!
I just say no. I'm not. I'm trying to.
I love your passion.
So in saying that.
And we're neighbors.
Part of the discussion that we all should have as a collective, but it's cut out of the discussion, right? So I've been part of the Democratic Party deep. I've been part of the progressive movement at the beginning back in 2013 when the People's Lobby came into Chicago. I was a founding member of United Working Families. I've been on the whole spectrum of all this stuff, especially in Chicago and Illinois. So one of the problems that I believe is still relevant is who we're talking about. So we know now there are a whole bunch of people came out of Africa at some point and was sent to different nations and went to different nations, right? But the people we're talking about are Black Americans. So as well, I can appreciate problems in the diaspora. I also don't see the people in the diaspora helping coming for Black Americans. That's a separate convo that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, that's why.
Yeah, we see it opposite the wrong way. It's like we're expected.
Because that's what you see. That's why I wanted to share.
That
little piece with you.
We're expected to jump in everybody else's defense, and no one from any countries, any organization, they don't step in our scenario, and we get pushed to the bottom again.
But that's why I was sharing with you what Chavez sought to do, because they also get blocked by our government. No, and you're right, but when they have tried to make overtures, they get blocked. One of the things I think that's also missing, because I'm with you, I'm 10 toes down on making sure, because we've spent our lives fighting for Black people to get our fair share. But we also knew that if we did not have coalitions, we were not going to win. Having said that, That's why I wanted to bring in the H-1B visas at the top and the tent partnership for refugees, because I've been to these countries, Brian Mullins, with Reverend. I'm going to shift to you, Curry, and we're going to come back around. So just want you to know that.
Sure.
And these people on an ordinary day wouldn't speak to Reverend Jackson. He'd get to these countries, Dr. Pine, and the head of the big oil company, I'm not going to throw out names, in the American, who heads the American company, say in Brazil. Oh, I got to talk to you, Reverend, because I got this left-wing government here, and they're going to take all their oil. And Reverend said, well, they should, because it belongs to them. This is not yours. So what can I help you do? Well, Reverend, what we need you to do, we need you. And these people are, and then you talk to the progressive leadership there, and they're like, look, we like that. That's what Castro did. When he came to New York, he was staying at the Teresa at a certain time when the Teresa was still operational, right? And so I'm hearing you, Brian. I'm feeling you. And I think that corporatism is a much bigger is the fish that we don't want to fry, and it's the one with all the meat on it. I mean, because this is a corporatist plan, and they keep playing us so that they can continue to take our resources and splinter us to the four winds in a hurricane. But stay right there, Brian. Don't leave.
Yeah,
Don't leave. Curry, Peterson, Smith, what's your take? And I'm so glad that you're here, Brian, because we need to hear what you're saying. I mean, and we need to be able to engage with each other. And I want you to know you're part of the family now.
Oh, sure.
So I'm going to have you back all the time.
Good, yeah. Right.
So that we can have this discussion. It's very important to hear this perspective. I don't want you to be excluded.
Sure.
Corey, your thoughts? Because you deal with a whole range of issues. I mean, you're seeing what's happening in the Middle East and all around the world, and you're seeing. I mean, and there's a line there. I mean, Dr. Pine, you see the through line.
Yeah.
Corey, Peterson, Smith.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what an amazing discussion. I'm really grateful and honored to be here. And, I'm not from Chicago, but I love Chicago. And I love being there. And I'm also struck whenever I'm there, it feels like, and I hope that this lands with love, because it's meant with love. It feels like a Frankenstein city. You know what I mean? Like parts of it grafted onto each other for real. Like I go to some parts and I'm like, the level of investment in this part of Chicago, and then like the level of neglect in this part of Chicago is just unreal. And what Brian's talking about is like, yeah, it's like for Black Chicago, parts of Black Chicago, it's like generations of neglect. Generations. We have to talk about the number of Black folks who've left Chicago because
we've been pushed out.
Pushed at, right. That's more accurate.
I mean, when my brother was running for Congress, he said, I want the South Side to look like the North Side. People looked at him like he was a joke. When you go to the South Side and the North Side, I want you to come back, Corey.
Right.
We have the same housing on both sides of town. You see it, Brian. The difference is, and even when you go west, where now you've seen a lot of our Mexican American brothers and sisters have settled. The difference is, somehow or another, they got capital. We didn't.
So that's so real. And my concern here is that reality that is generations deep, the anger, the bitterness, which is righteous, is being directed toward these folks who've just arrived here. You know what I mean? Like this was not like, if you're coming here from Central America or Venezuela, that's not your fault that this is this stratified, unequal city. That's not, I always think about how wild it is, how wild it must be to arrive in this country as an immigrant, because there's no like orientation. Nobody's like, hello, welcome. By the way, slavery was at the foundation of this country. You know what I mean? And like, we never addressed that. And so it shapes every aspect of American life. Nobody tells you that. You know what I mean? And so these folks are arriving in this context, not, you, Miss Santita, just rightly said, Black folks didn't leave Chicago, they were pushed out. folks who are arriving in Chicago and in this country now, they were pushed from where they came from.
Yeah.
And they're entering a wild context in a country where people are always pitted against each other. I mean, the kind of what we're witnessing, and which you open this conversation with, thinking about the way that Ukrainian folks were treated upon arrival and the way that folks from Latin America and Haiti and Africa are being treated. In a lot of ways, this is US history in a nutshell. This is how it works. Stratified, racially, divided, different vulnerable communities pit against each other. And I guess what I'm hoping we do, rather than just repeat the history, rather than just repeat the script, is to flip the script and say, we're not going to repeat the 20th century or the 19th century. And I'll just end my thought by saying, if we're talking about Chicago, if we're talking about Black Chicago, Black Americans, we have our own migration story, right? Like, we can't talk about Chicago without talking about the Great Migration.
Yeah.
There was a time when our folks, our communities arrived en masse and were greeted with white supremacist violence, right?
Because we were run out of the South.
I mean, that's right. That's right. Forced, displaced from the South. And then upon arrival in northern cities and in Chicago in particular, faced unreal white supremacist violence. That's part of our story. That's what we survived. And as folks arrive now, we want to do something different, you know, and it's not, given what people are dealing with, that kind of solidarity that, you know, I'm talking about, that, you know, Brother Thurston's talking about, that, you know, Dr. Pine's talking about, it's not easy. You know what I mean? It's not always easy or straightforward. But it takes work. It takes love. That's what I think we should be pursuing. Something different than a repeat of U.S. history.
Because the repeat's not going to work.
Well, I mean, it'll work for them. You know what I mean? Like Donald Trump this is not some, and not just Trump, but this whole, everything we're describing now is not some original idea. This is a tried and true set of practices, you know, and it has worked for them quite well. That's why Chicago's a Frankenstein city. That's why it's a Frankenstein country, you know? So how do we get out of this? I don't want a repeat of the 20th century.
I see a sermon. I hear it, Pastor Thurston. I know Frankenstein. Look, Dr. Pine, I saw Frankenstein, that gentle, crazy looking giant. And that is Chicago. Because people forget Good Times. That was that was the border of the Gold Coast. The Soul Coast and the Gold Coast were right next door to each other. You don't remember it, Stephen. You were too young to remember those projects. Brian and I remember that. And you were like, when you see it on television, you said, this is interesting. Because right here, the wealthiest people in Chicago live across the street. But that's how we get down here in Chicago. I mean, Dr. Pine, what do you make of this? Because and I think sometimes it takes someone from outside of here, Brian Mullins and Pastor Thurston, to say, you all have a Frankenstein city. This is like the way this has been pulled together. This is crazy. I mean, and Brian Mullins and Pastor Thurston, you know this. Corey Peterson Smith, Dr. Adrian Pine, you know they would not have been able to drop these brown people in the middle of an affluent white community. And that makes Black people go, are you serious right now? And see, South Shore is the middle class Black community, as we both know, Brian. They have been dumped in Inglewood, where the life expectancy is not even 60 years of age, Dr. Pine. On the North Shore, they live 30 years longer. They ain't got no hospital. If a woman has a baby, she's got to leave Inglewood and drive a long time. Is that not right, Brian? I mean, it's, with a maternal mortality rate, it's the global South in the United States, and exponentially so for Black women. Oh gosh, this is a mess. So how do we kind of get out of this? I mean, what What do you see? I mean, because you are an anthropologist. You not only look at this up close, but you look at it far away. What do we do?
Well,
Oh,
I
I just
think
wanted to
that
get muted.
I think the first thing we need to do is to really have these sorts of deep conversations where we're recognizing the connections between what has been already very correctly mentioned, the fact by Brian and others that every new wave of immigrants gets pitted against Black Americans in this country because of that caste system that you're mentioning, and they are allowed to succeed, whereas the repression, the sort of success of the US model of imperialist capitalism depends on the ongoing subjugation of Black people, and that is inextricable from US military domination of the world and the processes that are producing migrants who are coming from all over the world, whether we're talking about police killings of Black people in the United States by police who have been trained by the same Israeli military that is currently carrying out and continuously carrying out a genocide against Palestinian people, both in Israel and in cop cities that are being built all over the United States. The fact that counterinsurgency programs in the United States, as my colleague Dr. Ori Burton have shown, or counterinsurgency programs were developed to be used abroad in foreign countries, were developed based on Black prisoner liberation struggles and finding effective ways to suppress those, right? So there's this interplay between the repression of people in supposedly sovereign nations around the world and the repression of Black people in the United States that is crucial to both the growing fascism that we have, the sort of more evident fascism that we have under Trump, although as many folks have mentioned here, it really is a process that's been ongoing for decades, if not centuries, right? But it also is behind the migration. I mean, we're talking about Venezuela, for example. People aren't migrating from Venezuela because of communism or socialism. They're migrating because the United States sanctions. Venezuela only became a migrant-producing country after Obama first initiated sanctions. So around 2016, that's when migrants started leaving Venezuela, because these blockades, these unilateral coercive measures, create such tremendous harm. They make people hungry. A study by CEPR, the Center for Economic Policy Research, found that just between 2017 and 2018, there were 40,000 excessive deaths in Venezuela directly attributable to the sanctions, and those numbers continue to grow because of sanctions that were implemented by Trump and then continued by Biden against Cuba, and also the designation of a state sponsor of terror. Over 10% of the Cuban population has had to leave that magnificent country where everybody gets free healthcare and free education, and has really been a model for the world in terms of exporting doctors rather than military. But the United States punishes that, and in the same way, and through that sort of violence also learns how to more effectively punish Black communities that are striving to succeed. And so it's interconnected. We need to understand these interconnections, and our strategies need to be built on the solidarity that only an understanding of this interconnectedness can produce.
But I mean, Brian Mullins, and I'm sorry, this is only like 55 minutes, but I promise you, next time. No. Next time we're going to have a part 2. Because I think that because I'm going to get closing thoughts from you and Pastor and Curry, but because I think that because everyone has presented a very compelling case. Everybody, yes, even you, Brian Mullins. We don't. I mean, because
I barely even said anything. I got a lot to go. No.
No. And you'll be back. and you'll be back, just to do that. But so, but what say you? Because I mean, this is an ongoing conversation,
Sure.
and I think we need to have it
Yeah.
because I think as we continue to dig underneath, we're going to be. I think we might be surprised by what we find.
I think this is definitely a long conversation, and we have it, and since the election, we have it more often. So, you know, we've been on the same pathway for the last 6-7 years, saying the same things. We haven't changed what our agenda and our thoughts are on issues. But we had a couple of things. One thing that comes into play, and this is class, right? In Chicago, and I know you're not from Chicago, but class plays a big role in Chicago. So you have a Black elitist class that has been with the money people. So all the people getting grants, all the people doing we talk about development and education and housing and why our communities are underdeveloped. We view Democratic Party members, and a lot of them look just like us, as the culprit. It's not a Donald Trump, not an American imperialism. The dollars were there and misused and stolen, right? And so we see all this, which now we see the Democratic Party saying, okay, we're all, and I have people, you all from Chicago, I'm not going to mention the name, you're going to make us lose. I say, who are we? Because you've never been with us before. You're on the other side of the sidewalk, right? You're over there having a good time. We're over here hurting. Now, all of a sudden, it's one big unified Black Chicago. Well, that's not true. It's not a unified Black Chicago. It's class separations. And I'm going to say that the lower class, the less economically viable people, are now having a voice and standing up, pushing back, which is why you see the Go Red movements and all the other movements about flipping Chicago red coming out, because Black Chicagoans are tired of being misused by the Democratic Party. Now, that's a local conversation down local and state.
No, I think it's
but it trickles upwards, you know. Yeah. And I want to say one before I get my last closing statement. I'm part of the reparations movement, been around there since about 2015. We watched, if you all watched in October, in California, we watched the Black Democrats, the Congressional Black, the local, the state level members deny and shut down reparations, wouldn't bring it to the floor. Now that's out of California. I was on a call with 8,000 people from around the country. What do we do next? Don't vote for Kamala. Punish somebody for the Democratic Party continuing, even in the middle of an election where they needed the Black vote. They sat back and said, we don't care about this anymore. They never did. And see, those are the problems you see in Chicago. I personally believe it's going to be a continued roll up of these issues. In the next couple of months, you see municipal elections, which is where you build power. So you can see all these different people running. It's Republicans running in Thornton Township. I think the Democratic Party is in trouble. And I also believe it's not about a party, right? So if a Republican Party comes and says, this is what we're going to do for you, I would tell people we need to vote this way. And that's the problem. So.
But Brian, that's always been our issue. Yeah. The fact is the civil rights movement was not from the Black middle class. And the Black middle class.
Absolutely.
It was always from the bottom.
And I'm sorry.
Jackson was pushed to run for president, not by the Black upper class.
Right.
It was the people at the bottom. We ran for our plane that we were finally able to pull together for Reverend's campaign. It crashed and our whole crew was killed. It was in such bad shape, but that's all we could afford.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
We passed the Kentucky Fried Chicken bucket.
Right.
Literally.
Right.
So we get from place to place to place.
Right.
Reverend ran for president under the Democratic banner because you couldn't run with Reagan.
Correct.
The fact is, we were not even at the table. We were not at the menu. We were still in the fields in 1983. Right. So wait, the thing is, somebody got it twisted. We didn't get it twisted. Some other folks got it twisted, because whenever you get people in, they end up really moving away from the original intention.
Right. Yeah.
And that is what has happened.
Absolutely.
Because nobody is your friend. You don't have enemies. You don't have friends in politics. You have opponents and allies. We have to grow up in our politics. Corporatism is the monster.
Right.
The oligarchs have a party. It's called the Democrats and the Republicans. They have different cultural appeals. Right. Everybody needs to get over it. Now the question is, now how are we going to come together and make this thing work? Because you know what? They dumped tens of thousands of pills in the white community in Appalachia. to numb them out like they dropped crack in the black community. It's the same game. They just gave them pills and they gave us crack. Isn't somebody going to figure it out and get sick of it? I'm not going to fight them, even if they don't really they might not know you're black. I ain't mad at you, Brian, but the rest of us still know. They'll know we are. They'll think you're Arab, Stephen. That's all right. I ain't mad at a brother. I ain't mad. Come on, Curry, we're doing our thing. But at the end of the day,
I tried to get housing from Chicago. They denied me. Just so y'all know, I'm poor, so I tried to get help, and they didn't help me. I tried to go in there like I was a migrant, and they didn't.
No. I'm saying the thing is, all they want these people in here, they want them for cheap labor, and everybody's getting played. Ain't nobody trying to leave 80-degree weather to come to a place that's colder than Antarctica as it was last week in Chicago. Are you serious right now? Black folks are moving back to the South because we don't do this cold weather well. I'm sitting up here. I got 20 layers on right now. But Corey Peterson Smith, your closing thought, then I'm going to let you close out, Pastor Thurston. Oh, Lord, it's just so much.
Yeah, just, well, one, it's tragic that I'm glad that we touched on the two-party situation here. I'm glad that we touched on it because it's tragic, actually, that the choice feels like a party of corruption, which, again, I'm not from Chicago, and I say, again, said with love, the corruption is legendary. You know what I mean? Everybody knows.
It is.
You know what I mean? That's how Chicago politics works. And that the only other option, supposedly, is this vengeful, hateful, white supremacist party. We have to break out of that. That's unacceptable. So, I think that we have to build something new and not just build a new party. I mean, a new political reality that is about sharing this place. Black folks, we didn't choose to come to this place, but here we are. Now we have to share this place. So I guess I'll just leave it with that. How do we build that kind of politics where we reject division and figure out how to share this place? Because, when we're talking about how we have never been allowed to succeed in America as different waves of immigrant communities have come in, if success in America looks like turning your back on vulnerable people, is that what we really want? That's not a success that I want for me or for my community. I think that we can imagine something better. So let's do that.
Pastor Stephen Thurston, it sounds like he preached a sermon for you.
Yeah, to what Curry was saying, it's my challenge to African Americans, to Black people, whatever you want to call us, that we not become like the Jewish people. Here's what I mean by that. Because they were oppressed for so long, they will never forget. And then you turn around and look at what they've done in Gaza, and they've done to others what was done to them. Mm. And oftentimes we can be so discombobulated once we reach a place of being separated from our past that we become our oppressors. And I don't want Black people to become the oppressors of other people who have come to this place called America, looking for asylum, looking for freedom, looking for opportunity. We can't do that. We have some morals that we need to plug into that should not allow us, our moral compass should not allow us to hurt, harm, or marginalize other people in the same way that we've suffered and endured. And so we must come together, we must forge together, and we must fight together against that small group of people who want us harmed and hampered.
Well, there it is. You do unto others as you would have them do unto you. You don't do to others what has been done to you. I guess that's really it. And we're going to get there. And I really appreciate this conversation, and all of my morning stars appreciate the conversation too. And Brian, you are part of the family now, so there you go. And absolutely. And Adrian Pine, Dr. Pine, you're part of the family now. Curry Peterson Smith, you're part of the family now. Stephen Thurston welcomes you to the family. Because this is what we do. One of the blessings of this platform is to be able to have these conversations and give those who are unvoiced a voice and a platform. That's really what this is about. And by talking with each other, not at each other, but talking with each other, I think we're going to come to some solutions. Brian Mullins is speaking to a very real pain of people who have continued to be, we've been betrayed over and over and over again in this country. The indigenous people, betrayed. And even as the Supreme Court gave them, what, 47, 48% of Oklahoma, they have not gotten it back yet. I mean, what are we going to make good on a treaty for the people whose land we're on? What are we not going to have a Frankenstein city or country? You don't have to be from Chicago to understand that Chicago is stark, Dr. Pine, because it's the most segregated city in the United States. It has been for decades. The Kerner report, they were looking here. So what are we going to do, everybody? What are we going to do? You know what? Dr. King asked the question so profoundly almost 60 years ago. I think you know it, Pastor Thurston. Where do we go from here? Chaos or community? I think we can have community, which means you're going to have peace, love, and justice. Grace, goodness, mercy for everybody. And you will understand everybody's story. And you will understand everybody's pain. And it will mean something to you because you'll not just have sympathy, but you'll have empathy. We can do that, everybody. All we have to do is grow. I love you, everybody. I am Santita Jackson, AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota, sending you much love, everybody. Thank you. God bless.